Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Take care. Thank you for being with us and welcome to Awake, Minute by Minute podcast. This is minute 19. I'm your host, Chris, and with me we have the usual suspects, Priyank and Mike. But we do also have a special guest today, so I'm going to introduce Pablo in just 1 minute. But Priyank, how are you, mate? How's everything in your world today?
Hunky-dory.
Hunky-dory. This is the scientific definition. I thought, where's the weather update? We're in the UK. We've got UK, Portugal. We've got LA, and then I think Pablo might be in Brazil, but we'll get to that in a minute. But good, Mike, how are you? You're in some studio today.
All dandy. Yeah, I'm in a friend's recording studio, so he's got loads of instruments and equipment. So I'm trying not to break anything, basically.
Yeah, we'll not put you on the spot and ask for a little guitar solo.
Absolutely. I got a flute here, but I don't know how to play it. So.
Okay. Well, good to see you, and Pablo, welcome to the podcast. And maybe you would take a minute or two to just introduce yourself. Where are you in the world? We do have international listeners, so whereabouts are you in the world, Pablo?
Yeah, so great. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here. So I'm currently in Brazil, in Porto Alegre. That's my hometown, even though I work in France and should be going there soon. And very glad to be joining you today.
Porto Alegre. Where's Porto Alegre? It's further south, I think.
Yeah, it's like the southernmost state in Brazil. So it's very close to the border with Argentina and Uruguay. Mm-hmm. So it's a bit colder here than you would expect in most of Brazil. So right now, I'm really like with a lot of coats and with heating on. So it should be a very different situation from yours.
Yes. Well, my fiance is Brazilian, and she was showing me some video of the snow that's falling in the south of Brazil, and everybody's running through the streets like, gone mad.
It's not too far from the place where I am. So you have an idea how cold we are here.
Yeah, it's shock horror. We usually, by the way, Pablo, there's an inside joke where it's developing, where there's usually a weather update at the beginning of the podcast.
So, and it's usually Chris that's giving a very detailed Irish weather update.
Irish weather update. It usually snows, sunshine, rains in one day, so it's quite extreme there. But I find myself in Portugal today, so it's a little bit different. But up in Sintra, Portugal, awesome. I thought any Portuguese listeners, yeah. So Pablo, maybe tell us, how did you come onto the path of SRF?
So I got into SRF, I think about 15 years ago. So I was a teenager. I think it was like about 18 in Brazil, and I discovered the group here. And the way I got to discover SRF was really special for me. So there was a local radio show in my hometown in Brazil, in Porto Alegre, where occasionally there would be a guest that would come to talk about Oriental teachings, Oriental philosophies. And since I was a teenager, I was into those subjects. And I used to listen to this radio show with this guy, who was an elderly author who had written several books about Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism. And I found his show and his books very interesting. And one day I was so interested in what he talked about that I looked upon the telephone book, the telephone directory. That's just giving away how old I am. Like people would look into the telephone book at those times. And I look upon his number and I call him and I told him about like, oh, I read your books. I'm very interested in that. And we kind of became friends. And in that moment, like he became kind of a mentor telling me, like if you're interested in Buddhism, read this, read that. And that went on for a while. And after some time that this was going on, I came to talk to him and I said to him, I'm reading all those things. I find it very interesting, but I just found that at this point, I'm just going nowhere and just feel like stagnant. And at that point, he told me right away, you need to find a guru. But then he said but a true guru is very difficult to find. So what I suggest to you is to do the following. I'm going to give you 3 books. Then you read those 3 books and you see if you can connect with them. But not only that, you look at the pictures of the gurus who are in the book and you ask them to help you, to kind of guide you to your right path. So I got the first book. It was not from Yogananda, and it was an amazing book of a truly authentic master. But whenever I would look at that picture, I didn't feel any kind of connection. So I say, okay, this is not working. And then I left it aside for probably a year. And then after a year, I came to the second book, and it was the autobiography of a yogi. And right away, I felt like looking at the pictures of the masters and reading the book, like a deep connection. It was as those gurus in the pictures were alive. So there was like this connection right away. And as I was reading this book, there was this feeling, it is as if he's revealing to me something that I already know deep inside, even though it was not conscious, even though I was not aware. It's like revealing to me something that was already deep within me. So that's how I got to know SRF. And then I discovered there was a group in my city. And that's how my journey began.
Awesome. Yeah, awesome. So many times we've heard Yogananda's eyes being the thing that really grabbed people, just how he communicates, even in a picture. I think George Harrison said at the beginning of the movie, how his eyes were, zapped him and kind of captivated him right from the get-go. And so when did you first watch the movie Awake?
Oh, wow. I think it was probably the first time it was available online. I don't remember oh no, I think it was probably in an SRF convocation when it became available. I'm not sure, like 3 years ago, something like that. I'm not sure, but and I have watched many times since. Yeah, it's interesting that even though like you have been in SRF for many years, like when you see the movie, it just highlights some aspects or even facts that you were not aware, at least in my case. So even for that reason, I have watched the movie many times, just to crystallize in my mind all those things that I wasn't aware or that I hadn't paid too much attention before.
Yeah, we had a few people from the movie come on and do interviews with us, and hearing their insights, their research that they put into it. But that's the reason, I guess, part of the reason why we're doing this show. There's just so much content there, hence why we can actually have 1 hour coverages of every minute. So awesome, Pablo, awesome, really great to have you. So I can give a
question, actually.
Go for it.
Pablo, Brazil is one of, I think, probably the 3rd biggest following in SRF, I think something like that. Is that right? Why is it so big in Brazil?
Right, it's actually huge. So just like to give you a context, I think that we have about 4 or 5 retreats, SRF retreats in Brazil, like in different settings, like in beaches, in the mountains, everywhere. In the big cities, like for instance, Rio, on a Sunday service, you will have like about 150 people. I think in Salvador, Bahia, I think it can get up to 200 people in one Sunday service. I mean, why? It's always difficult to say why. People feel this connection. Maybe it's from past lives. I think Brazilian people, they are very devotional. And that's one aspect of the SRF path that connects very much with them. This heart feeling, this devotion, this joy that is so ingrained in Brazilian people. I think those are things that connect them a lot to Yogananda.
I think you've lived in a couple of different places, haven't you? You lived in the UK for a little while, and obviously that's where we met as a group. And you knew that obviously UK is a probably smaller community of self-realization fellowship devotees. Do you feel like in Brazil, because it's so big, it feels much bigger, or is there any difference between the size of community and your connections and stuff like that?
Right. So, I mean, the London group is quite big, quite in the American sense, right? It's very big. So and I found the community there very like nurturing. So I didn't feel the difference in that sense. But of course, what you miss like are the friends that you make in each place. But that you basically miss everywhere you go. Like you leave a little bit of your heart in everywhere.
I understand you live in Paris now. How is SRF over there? How's it in France?
So in Paris, there is a group. It's much smaller than the London group, but there is a very dedicated group of devotees. And now there's also a retreat just outside Paris where people can go and go for individual retreats.
Is it in the Palace of Versailles, for instance?
I think it's the Palace of Fontainebleau. It's close to the Palace of Fontainebleau.
It's actually in a palace.
No, it's not a palace. Sorry, it's like in the region where the palace is.
Okay.
It's not in the palace. Like we didn't get to this level yet.
Awesome. Well, I can kick off the minute 19 summary, and we can go through the whole thing and then recap and we'll go back over it. So at the beginning, following the last minute, we have Anupam Kher's voice, Yogananda's voiceover, talking about the nature of the body and the potential, specifically, of the body being vast and omnipresent. And we see a computer-generated human sitting in lotus posture that disintegrates into particles, and similar to the end of the last minute in that sense, where we saw a man standing disintegrating into particles. And the next thing is Yogananda's voice himself, and we see how he talks about his perception of the earth being nothing but movies, all shadows and light, and he likens this to humans as light and shadows of the Lord. He mentioned something curious here, saying beyond purpose, and I'll come back to this because I think that's it's certainly an interesting comment that they decided to include in there. And as we hear Yogananda's voice, we see pictures of old school movie cameras, vintage scenes of people watching, a cowboy western in a cinema. And I thought it was funny. There was a woman shaking her head in sheer shock at being watching a movie. She was totally engrossed. And then we have some nice close-ups of the camera and the camera reel with the little boy dressed in his Sunday best, and he's turned around dramatically and looks towards the light of the shining camera with curiosity. And finally, we have Mas Vidal's voice, and we have him there talking about doors of perception and how the intellect is insufficient to open these doors, and suggesting that something really quite powerful would have to happen to shake us out of that comfort zone to open these doors. And the scenes then of India, once again, people in boats on the river, and things being burnt and bells ringing in the background. So quite powerful scenes, and plenty here to talk about. So we can go back over these one by one, and of course, talking about the initial comments of the nature of the body. I thought it was super interesting when they said Yogananda here with Anupam Kher's voiceover said the potential of the nature of the body is vast and omnipresent. Priyak, what's your take on this initial comments of the body and the nature of the body?
It kind of goes back to what we were saying previously. In the previous minute, Pablo, we were talking really about the science of consciousness and how everything is connected, and how there's a vast infinite consciousness, and your consciousness, and like the boundaries are blurry, like when you really delve into the science of it. And like I think this goes back to like if you think about like your body, like it's actually should, like, I don't know how to say it. It should really be see-through, because it's like virtually all of it is empty space, isn't it? 99.9% of what you see here it is empty space. If you look at things on a molecular level, but actually we see things as something gross. So inside of us, or inside every atom and molecule, is just space, it's ether. So I think it's something to do along with those lines, and that links well with the imagery of the the body disintegrating, as you said, the animation that we saw.
Mike, when you hear about the potential of the nature of the body, what do you think he means by this word?
Yeah, it's like Priyank said, like where we left off in the last minute, like Yogananda was describing the human body, and things are not the way they seem, right? Because essentially we are not those earthly beings. We are a soul inside a causal body, inside an astral body, inside a material body. And I feel like this is where this comes from when you say your body reaches beyond what you see. You're inside your human body, there's somewhere this call it energy that is actually contains your mind and is connected to your soul. And that doesn't have the same boundaries as the material body. It doesn't have the same boundaries in space. And potentially infinite is basically at the end of the day, you are one with God, and God is infinite. And I feel like that's where your infinity claim comes from in the end.
And Pablo, you've read the autobiography of a yogi, maybe more than once, and in it, there's lots of references to the cities and how Yogananda's experience from time to time, individuals in his life showing their mastery over the nature of matter and appearing and disappearing and being being in two places at once and things like this. Is this when you hear omnipresent, as a body is omnipresent? What are your thoughts? Because that's what my thoughts are triggered, like omnipresent. So it could be anywhere and everywhere at one time, in a sense. Where does your mind go when you hear these words?
Right. So I think the first place my mind goes it's really like Yogananda telling, like, I think his experience of a first samadhi that he describes in the autobiography of a yogi, where like he describes how limitless his consciousness became when he had this experience. I think, of course, not having gone through this experience yet, like, I don't think I can fully grasp, but like my mind first goes to this idea that we are much more vast than our consciousness normally is, and I think that meditation is a way that we are trying to constantly expand our consciousness and beyond the body. And these experiences of Yogananda telling of his samadhi was the first thing that came to my mind about how can we go beyond this like limited notion of the body.
Yeah, it's funny you said that. Whenever Yogananda was sitting, and I think Sri Yukteswar comes and gives him an experience to where he can see through walls. He's sitting there in a home. He can literally see through matter for in the astral world. Like, this is, I can only simply imagine it, unfortunately, so far. I need to meditate deeper. But this is kind of what I see. It's almost like the Matrix, the movie that I know we've got a few big fans of here, when Neo like suddenly realizes that he's the one, and everything's just numbers, and he jumps into the bodies of the bad guys, of the agents. This is kind of like where my mind goes a little bit, on these kind of paths as well, which I think is so exciting, isn't it? Because imagine trying to have like this simple, very, very, very short sentence in a conversation with somebody 100, 200, 300, 500 years ago. You'd probably be burnt at the stake at some point in history, for even talking about the body being anything but flesh. So yeah, it's really exciting. I don't know what you guys think about that. It's really exciting in my view.
Yeah. I was just looking at the Samadhi poem that Pablo just mentioned, and I think the bit that he probably may have been talking, there's two bits that sounded like he could have been talking that. So there's two lines. One of them is, you go on, Pablo. Oh, sorry, I heard some echoing. It says, I swallowed, transmuted all into a vast ocean of blood of my own one being. So there's that line. That seems to ring true to what we're talking about now. And then there is another one. Well, first of all, what do you think of that line? Do you think that resonates with that, what we're talking about?
Yes, totally. That's the spirit of what I wasn't thinking about specific line, but that totally fits what I was thinking about.
Yeah, so there's others, but and he also tells us to memorize that poem. I don't know if anyone has been successful in that.
I also heard from an SRF monk like that he suggested that people they should read and even memorize this poem. I don't know if you heard that as well.
Yeah,
because that's for your consciousness to be accustomed and to this idea of omnipresence, of liberation, and to try to prepare for that.
And
say it again, Priyank. I think that warrants a repeat.
Said it. Okay, I might as well say it again then. So there's two lines I wanted to say. One of them is oh gosh. I swallowed, transmuted all into a vast ocean of blood of my own one being. And there is one more line that seems to be related also, which is Samadhi but extends my conscious realm beyond limits of the mortal frame to the farthest boundary of eternity.
Pretty awesome. I also love Yogananda's comments on the think eternal, think infinite. And when I hear these words, it does similar things to me when I heard for the first time cosmic consciousness. When you think for a cosmic level, you kind of naturally get into that synchronization with infinity and with eternity. So those words are really beautiful. Thanks for sharing.
I just remember one thing more that I thought it would be worth sharing. I think there's this video or DVD by Mrinalini Mata where she describes when she was with Yogananda, when he had this big Samadhi experience that was much profound than his previous Samadhis in 1948. And there's a part of that video where she describes that he was talking directly with God, in the form of that Divine Mother during this deep Samadhi. And he was talking loudly so that the disciples would understand what was going on. And in this conversation with Divine Mother, sometimes the Guru would say, God would expand his consciousness, different realms, to different universes even. And then they say, wow, is that all that has, my conscious has been greatly expanded and have much more conscious. Is that all that is? And then Divine Mother saying no. And then it would expand even more. Wow. His consciousness, beyond we can perhaps even imagine.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think I need to rewatch that DVD. Do you remember what it's called?
Do you know what it's called, the DVD?
Do you remember what it was called, Pablo?
I think it's In His Presence, but I might have to check.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, send it to us. We could include it in some analysis. Yeah, and Mike, I have a technical question for you, being the computer guy of the group. The IT engineer, Priyank, that's the official title now. The computer generated human sitting in lotus posture that disintegrates into this 1,000 particle form. How hard is that to do? Because we've seen it a couple of times now. How hard is that to do?
I'm not an expert in 3D modeling. Is it hard to do? I think probably was hard to do maybe 10 years ago or something. Now it is probably a filter or a button in some 3D modeling program that you press, and it just happens, because it's a common effect that you see in other parts as well. So yeah. I don't think it's that difficult, but yeah. I think this kind of effect that you get from it is something that people use in all kinds of ways. Like you see it like sometimes someone becomes, I don't know, birds and they fly away, or butterflies and they fly away and stuff. It's just a very nice effect.
It reminded me, I think I just rewatched the Matrix movies years ago as Priyank changes his image to a multitude of faces, smiles, right? For anybody watching on YouTube, you can say that's beautiful.
I did that. So, that wasn't a computer. I just thought of it.
It just happened. Yeah. Manifest. Nice. And you know how technology moves quite quickly, and I guess the guys doing the directing and editing of the film would have had to keep up with technology, because they made this film over a 6-year period. So back 6 years prior to the release of 2014, 2008 really they started doing this. So much would have been changing in that time. So looking back, it does look like it's getting old to my lay person eye. But it certainly would have had an impact at the time. So we can
every ape in the recent Planet of the Apes film is all computer generated imagery. Did you know that?
Yeah. All of them. What, were they not them. Before? Or?
No, before that, for the old film, they actually use apes, right? But here, like they literally zoom in, for example, right into the middle of his eye, then zoom out, and it looks like incredibly real. Obviously, not that relevant to this Awake film, but yeah.
It's only going to get more surreal, isn't it? More we're going to identify it more as real. I remember even further afield like that, I thought FIFA 11 was real back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, did you guys see this the movie The Irishman about Jimmy Hoffa?
Yeah.
And you had Robert De Niro looking like he's 35, right, in the whole movie, because they just they changed his face with a computer algorithm to make him look young. Fantastic.
Yeah. Well, the whole 1 hour talking about all the different tech that's available nowadays, artificial reality and all sorts. But cool. So going back to the analysis then, shall we, with Yogananda's voice, and we hear his voice coming for 10 or 15 seconds. And he's talking about the perception of Earth that he has being nothing but movies and shadows and light. And then he likens it to human beings. This is a great analogy, and one that he uses many times, in whether it be in song or in his talks. And I just thought to myself, sometimes I do see in life, in everyday life, little things that remind me of analogies of God, and how our place in life is simply illusionary to one degree or another. And I thought I would ask the maybe rather difficult question to each of you. I'll start, Pablo. I'll throw you the hospital pass.
No.
What
it's difficult. You can start with them.
Yeah, exactly. Give you some time to think. Well, I kind of feel it. Priyank, you're going to jump in, I think.
What's the question?
The question is,
I can answer too. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Answer your own questions. Yeah. Now, what would you say is something in life, in real life, that has reminded you, just as Yogananda uses the analogy of this cinema screen of God?
And you cannot use the Matrix.
You can't use the Matrix. It's already my shock on it.
Well, I've got a parallel discussion, but I think Pablo said he was kidding, so he can actually field this question. Being of you know, Pablo, we've got this analogy where like we like to give really hard questions and we call them hospital passes, because you know in football when like you're in defense and someone gives you a pass where you're going to get tackled and taken out of the game, so it's called a hospital pass. And similarly we do this with questions. But you being a Brazilian, you know, the best footballing nation in the history of the game, you should be able to receive a hospital pass, not only receive it but actually dribble up the pitch and score a goal. Go on, Pablo.
Well, I'll get that pass, but I have to confess I'm not great at soccer anyway, but right. Well, I'm not sure that's exactly the answer you wanted, but I think the message behind like this whole idea of like the life as a movie for me was the idea that like we should not become too attached to life. You know, like you cannot become too attached to what happens externally to you. You know, because like life sometimes is good, you go through good experiences, but inevitably you are going to go through bad experiences, difficult situations, you know. So what this quote of Yogananda reminded to me was that when you are going through those ups and downs in life, you know, which are inevitably, you just cannot be too much attached to what is happening. You have to, of course, you have to enjoy what is good and grieve sometimes the difficult situations, but remembering that the ultimate reality is not what is external, and then try to search for what is the real truth, or what is the real thing within. And that's basically what this quote reminded me of.
That's awesome. Priyank, we'll go switch to you next. Any examples of great analogies that you use when you think about God and the nature of reality?
So is this for me then?
Go for it, yeah.
So when I read these or hear this quote, to me the like really deep philosophical questions come out. And I'm sidestepping your question a little bit, Chris, because I don't have.
I'll let it go.
Solid response, but to me the real, you know, the question of where does free will end and where does destiny or fate begin, that question really comes to my mind when Yogananda uses this example of you know, life is just a movie, and you know, the projector and the screen of duality and all that stuff. And I really ponder where do I fit into that story? And you know, in Yogananda's in the poem back to that poem Samadhi, he says, thoughts of all men, past, present, to come, every particle of universal dust I swallowed, transmuted all. And so he's kind of in that he's kind of saying that he's seen everything that was, everything that is, and everything that will be. So where in that is our free will then? Or are we just playing, are we just reading a script in this, you know, is someone reading the script and we're playing the role like robots? Where is our free will?
I mean, I don't think I have an answer to it, but I'll provide my thoughts. I think that there's probably an infinite number of things that might happen in any moment. So it's infinitude on infinitude. And that goes beyond my imagination, but there's probably, you could choose to do anything in this very moment, but you know, given that time might not necessarily exist in our linear version of it, we're simply going through and experiencing one modality of the story. But yeah, that's just my thoughts, I guess. But playing computer games, I think has actually helped me in that, because in a computer game in sandbox, you can literally do anything at that moment. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. But you skipped the question. You skipped the question.
It's because I don't have a good answer for that question.
Yeah. Priyank probably doesn't have an answer for it.
Mike, go on. You can shed some light, I'm sure.
I mean, I feel like the question is a bit tricky. The only thing I would say is that the same kind of metaphor of the movie screen has been used in different ways in different kind of stories, right? I think Plato talks about the cave, right, where you have things happening outside and you're inside the cave. You don't see the things, but you see the shadows of the things moving past on the cave's wall. And then, of course, the idea would be you step outside the cave and then you see the whole picture. And I feel like that's a bit similar to the movie theater. What I want to say about the scenes in the movie theater, you see this woman that is incredibly engrossed in the film. So I think this is a film about a war, and she's like suffering with it. And this is an analogy for us being too entangled in life, or like Pablo said, too attached in life, because when bad things happen, then I feel like it's so important to stop, go inside and say, what is actually happening? You know, like, this is happening to me. Why is that? What is the lesson? And trying to detach, it's super hard, but trying to detach oneself from the actual thing that is happening, because it's not really happening to us, the soul. It is happening to our act that we're playing in the movie. And the second one is the kid, right? The kid watches the movie, but it's not super into it, I guess. And then it looks towards the light, towards the movie projector. And then you hear also the voice. It's like, what is the goal? The goal is to see where the light is coming from. And that is like two fantastic scenes that illustrate the quote of Yogananda.
I would ask a very difficult follow-up question, but I think I'll just give my musings on it instead. You said about being detached. It's quite difficult at times to be detached, and I was going to say, well, how would you go about actually being detached? But I think just to provide my thoughts on it, and jump in anybody with theirs. But it is quite difficult from moment to moment, and Yogananda said it is very difficult to not be so engrossed in the moment of the movie reel of your life to put your mind back onto God.
I feel. Oh yeah, go for it. Sorry.
No, I was only going to say sometimes maybe the question is framed wrong. We don't necessarily need to try to detach ourselves from it or have some modality there. It's more simply being aware of the grander context and the infinitude, and then it just kind of melts away. The illusion melts away on its own. You don't need to pry it off and do something, get it away. It just disappears on its own if you focus on God yourself all the time.
Yeah, that's a very balanced approach that you're taking there, and I think that's also a worthwhile approach. I feel like the way life often works is that's an unfortunate reality, is that suffering is often being used to take your mind off life and focus it on God. Because when you go through life and you hit a rough patch, then you have those moments where you look at, what is this? What am I doing wrong? And it changes your perspective. And then I feel like then life feels like, okay, now I suffered him too much and now I'm losing him. So then it gives you some good experiences. So you get all wrapped up in life again, and then it builds up to the next bad thing that happened to you. So if you constantly keep that awareness, it's a very good approach, Chris, I think.
This shadow and light business, it's such a good analogy, right? And I think we've said it here already, but just to kind of mention it again, it's the idea of good and bad, right and wrong, positive, negative, all exist within the realms of duality, and really beyond that to be fully enlightened. Yogananda talks about these things simply being states of existence, and God is beyond all of these things. And it's such a relief in a sense to kind of know that, because people say, well, if God is God and so powerful, why does he allow bad things to be? But they're simply things occurring in this realm beyond where God really exists. is my idea of it. But something I did want to touch on here, he talks about beyond purpose. You know, this is really the nature of reality. And purpose is a funny one, because I think somebody with a strong purpose can be quite dangerous. I think, as we've seen in history with that. But what's your idea of this beyond purpose comment that Yogananda has? And anybody can jump in here. Does anybody have any comments on what Yogananda really means as when he says that, you know, this is beyond purpose?
I can go again. When I think of purpose, I think of Jungian philosophy, because that's where this word purpose is in a lot, like by Carl Jung, because he says, like, you are born with a purpose usually, and following that purpose is what you need to do. If you don't do it, you become depressed, and if you do it, you feel accomplished, and everyone has a different one, kind of. And maybe when Yogananda says beyond purpose, it means that regardless of what your purpose is, this is not, that purpose won't get you to God, but finding God is the ultimate purpose in life.
Chris, isn't the script that there's one purpose, which is to get to the beam?
It could be. I heard beyond purpose.
Okay, I thought it was there's one purpose.
It should be there's one purpose.
I think so, yeah. Which kind of resonates with yeah, I think so. Because beyond purpose is quite a weird. It's not weird, but as Mike just said, you could reference that as well, because which purpose are you talking about? But if you're talking about the ultimate purpose, then yeah, you're talking about God realization, isn't it? And we mentioned, I think Pablo, Chris, Mike, and I, we discussed this in the last minute, like what is the purpose of, how we describe the purpose of life. And previously I'd said something along the lines of God realization through Satchitananda, which was in ever conscious, ever existing, ever new bliss consciousness, which is also what Chidananda's name kind of derives from. Well, how would you define, Pablo, the purpose of life, or the meaning of life?
I think like that's probably the definition that I would give, and just like to make it more like even more simple, I would just say like bliss consciousness or God consciousness, which is basically a consciousness of bliss, you know, of really ecstasies. I think that's in the end game, what we are truly looking for. You know, we are looking for God, but what God is, as you said, is like Satchitananda, is this eternal existent conscious bliss that we feel. So whatever we are doing, even if we have to be disciplined, or if we have to follow certain meditation practices, we should not ever forget that what we want to achieve is this consciousness of bliss, you know. And I think if you have this notion, very positive notion, very upbeat notion of what God is, it you know, it helps you, you know, because you're not just making a sacrifice to meditate or just to be a good person for anything, you know. I mean, not that it should be a sacrifice, but sometimes you have to be disciplined. But it's something that it's at every moment, at every second, putting you closer to attaining this consciousness of true happiness, of true and profound happiness.
Nice. And Yogananda, in the next line, and I'll paraphrase so we don't use the exact script, he says to get to the source is the purpose, pretty much. That's what he says in the next line, and he uses the movie, you know, the picture screen analogy, and get to the source of the beam. That's the purpose of our life, which is obviously, and the method or the result of doing that could be Satchitananda, as what you've just described as well. But you know, before we move on, I'd like to talk about Yogananda's elevated state, if I may. So we know obviously Yogananda is a guru, a self-realized master. We like to on this path, we call him a Prem Avatar, which is an incarnation of love. And I just as we were talking about this, I just thought of like, what is the difference between God, which is, you know, the source of the beam, as it were, and the manifestation of God in a guru, such as Yogananda. And I was just thinking, and I was relating it to the poem, the Samadhi poem as well. And you know, he says, I swallowed and transmuted all into my own one being. He says, like, you know, all these things that are like really, really cosmic and profound. And I was just thinking, like, he's in this ocean of cosmic consciousness, and like, to come out, he's imagining, I'm just imagining him swimming in this ocean of consciousness, and his head might be out, and that his like portrayal, or like his manifestation on this planet. He's just come out of cosmic consciousness just to come in and, you know, like be that guide for us.
Yeah, I wonder if he cried a lot as a baby just when he was born, or was he already peaceful? Yeah, and there must be so many occasions over, you know, the course of history where beings like him have come onto Earth and had a similar purpose to bring light into the world of shadows on the theme of this minute. Yeah, what, Pablo, would you say really with Yogananda on this note has, I'd like to ask this question, we've asked it of a couple people in the past, has been like your biggest learning from him, or what would you say if you come away with anything as a lesson from Yogananda, what would that be?
Oh, that's a really difficult question. I mean, lesson. So I mean, there's two things that came to my mind. If I had to say like a word, like in a more like intellectual way, I think there's like this quote from the autobiography of a yogi that says like, make a spiritual effort now and everything will become better in the future. I think, you know, that's the silver line of, you know, like it's, if you really want things to get better, like it's really through spirituality and achieving this greater connection with God, you know, and it will be better if you do that. But in terms of like experience, how do I feel like that it has made a difference in my path? I think it's just like really like your consciousness, you know, you start, it's very simple, but at the same time difficult to describe. It's just like your consciousness that changes in subtle ways, but in important ways. You just become a bit more calm, a bit more happy. It's as simple as that, in my view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's always different answers, I think, to that, which is the coolest thing, right? Because we're all drawn to master from our own backgrounds, or, you know, he knows exactly what it is as well to help train us and guide us through the path. So yeah, it's always nice to hear. So thanks for sharing.
Before we move on to the next scene, Pablo, can I also ask you? We like to discuss Yogananda's, not just his physical form, his face, etc. I think you've already described that. But can you recall when you first heard Yogananda's voice? And in particular, like in the film, there's lots of his voices of, you know, actual voice. Can you recall your experience then, or if not, can you tell us about your experience now when you hear his voice?
Thunderous.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, like, you know, this guy is really powerful, like thunderous. Yeah.
Was that then or now?
Well, like the first time, I think it was even more because I was surprised, you know, like, because I didn't know how his voice was, and then you're caught by surprise. But still today, I think like powerful.
If we think Yogananda's voice is thunderous, can you imagine what Sri Yukteswar's voice would have been like?
Wow.
Probably, he's probably a man of few words, right? So, you know, spoken words. And yeah, maybe actions speak louder than words for Sri Yukteswar. That's what I imagine when you said it. You know.
And it's funny because I think the first like video I watched from SRF was like Sri Dayamata, which is like very loving, very kind, you know, very not contained, but like just loving and sweet. And then Yogananda is like this thunder of power.
Yeah. probably why he's so popular in Brazil. Very, he's too much for most of us Brits, you know. But then right at home in Brazil, because you guys speak very much more like the Italians, you know, with emotion and zeal in your voice, don't you?
How's his voice for Austrians, Mike?
Familiar.
Yeah. Cool. So any more questions for Pablo before we go on?
I got infinite questions for
You
Pablo.
do, yeah.
No, but let's move on.
Well, yeah. In the last scenes, you know, we as I mentioned here, Mas Vidal's voice, and he was a guest. He's been a guest on the podcast. And, if you haven't heard him, definitely worth a listen. And he comes across, you know, with such, you know, interesting and powerful comments here about the doors of perception. I just wondered, you know, what does he really mean by door? It's a very abstract term, isn't it? The doors of perception. Pablo, what do you think he means by that? Doors of perception.
And it will paraphrase the whole section, which is our experience is limited. Our experience is limited by intellect, and we have to be shaken to come out of that just intellectual mode way of thinking. So I'll just paraphrase that whole section that he said.
Yes, thank you, Frank.
Right. So I think that every experience that we have is limited in many ways by the way we have been thinking, by the way we think, you know, by the way, and of course by all our senses, you know, by the sight, by the smell, by everything, and the way that these interact with our intellect. So I think it's about breaking all like these preconceptions, breaking these subconscious biases, and allowing our consciousness go beyond what is external to what is the truth, really, you know. But in the end, like what is the truth? What is the reality? It's not something that we can even totally grasp intellectually. It's just like some experience that you can live intuitively, you know. So in the end, like if you really want to have this deep ecstatic experience, go have an expansion of consciousness, you cannot stay in the intellect. It has to be beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
And the second section is that we have to be shaken.
Mm-hmm.
So like, so he's saying we have to come out of that, you know, just living on logic and stuff like that. And do you have any experience that you can think of where a shaking experience has actually been beneficial for your, you know, spiritual awakening, as it were? I can think of some things for myself if you can't think of any.
Well, actually, I can think of many things. I mean, it's just about like whenever you feel like vulnerable in your ego, you know, when sometimes you feel offended, you know, like somebody didn't pay attention to me, somebody said something that I didn't like, you know, normally that connects mostly with the ego, you know, because if you're really centered in yourself, if you're really humble, if the ego is not too much close to your soul, you know, those things don't touch you. So I think most of these experiences that we have, you know, like somebody didn't pay attention to me, or I don't like the way that people looked at me, you know, these little things that the ego react, they are little experiences that, you know, that the intellect doesn't let our doors of perception be more open, because what we truly are as a soul is like pure and unconditional love and wisdom and understanding beyond words. And if we are hearing like our small ego saying all those things all the time, that we are not like fully living who we are truly, who we truly are.
And on this note, Priyank, just to follow up on this, is I've heard whether people are in the temple or in the bar, they're looking for the same thing. And it's quite a powerful statement in itself, because I think so many people, myself included in the past, Mas Vidal talked about this, you know, how he got onto the path was he really kind of had to hit some form of rock bottom. And so many people do in one form or another. a lot of the cases that's drugs or the abuse of alcohol and different things. And relationships might break down, and I remember really quite distinctly when I was a kid, or 15, 16, looking at some people in my age group who maybe had started drinking really early and they hit some kind of wall in life, and you could tell they were suffering so deeply. And then they turned to God, right? And this was early on in my years, and I kind of thought to myself, like, this is before I became spiritually kind of driven. I thought to myself, gosh, they're maybe looking for answers, or maybe going towards some kind of secularism, in religion, because they failed at life, and they're finding comfort in other areas. And I almost looked at it, I'll have to admit, as a weakness of some people at the time. But little did I know then, but I look back now to say that this person was really seeking God and was going down the wrong path, because that's what society kind of said, that you do these things and you'll be socially accepted and you'll have joy through relationships in that sense. But the outcome is very negative, and Yogananda talks about this a lot, having the sweetness of honey, but maybe poison inside, and vice versa. There's so many things that life throws at us to take us onto a path where this is promising joy and delivers nothing, and then you have to live the life of discipline to follow the true path, and that initially tastes very bitter because you think it's so restrictive, like there's so many things you have to stop doing, to follow the fine line of looking for God. But then actually the sweetness that comes with that is really the beautiful thing and worth fighting for. So when I heard this for the first time, I thought, no doubt souls will all experience this. And I think this is where Buddhism comes in to say that life is pain and suffering. Unfortunately, it's because of ignorance, right? And we're too ignorant to kind of see what's the end goal of these activities. So that's my thoughts. But Mike, jump in.
I think even if you know the end goal already, it doesn't mean you're going there, right? And like imagine you go, like you live your life, you recently or not so recently said, I want to be on the spiritual path, and then you pray to God, spiritualize my life, spiritualize my ideas. And I mean, sometimes those ideas just change subtly in your mind and you don't even notice. Sometimes there's like real samskaras attached to them that need to be broken out a bit, right? And then it needs a more intense experience to get rid of them. And this, what you call rock bottom, sometimes this is a blessing for people, right? It reminds me of Sister Gyanamata, who had this famous quote, I think, where she says, like, don't change any of the circumstances in my life, change my attitude towards them, right? And I feel like when you have a guru, he will try to not overburden you with those experiences. He will give you one and he will like, okay, that's enough for him right now. Let's let him recover and then give him the next one later on. And then I feel like those hardcore devotees, they sometimes, if you look at their lives, they get those left and right, those kind of experiences, and they just maneuver them. And that's a part of life, but might look negative from the outside, but can also be incredible blessings because they steer your life in the right direction to where you actually want to go.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And Priyank, you said you had quite a few of these powerful experiences. Can you share any with us?
Yes, I can. So many, I suppose mostly relationships, but experiences in my life, they lead me to think of this chant.
In the valley of sorrow, 1,000 years or till tomorrow. In the valley of sorrow, 1,000 years or till tomorrow. But I'll wait to see only you, just you.
That summarizes it for me. And I've put that. There's a little sign next to my meditation room, and I've got everything else can wait, but this cannot wait, and something else. There's know it now, or in 1,000 or 1,000,000 incarnations. How long do you want to spend in this valley of sorrow? In this world where there's duality of pleasure and pain and suffering, and I don't want to spend much longer, if I'm honest.
All right. So
if I can quickly, I just wanted to share a story that I remember that brother Satyananda told exactly about this thing about breaking the ego. He said he was once in a Christmas meditation led by Mrinalini Mata, and as she was praying, she prayed like, God, impinge your love upon us. And then he said that once he heard that word impinge, he said, oh, come on, like, this is just too violent. Impinge is about invading, forcefully putting yourself upon us. And then he said that he wrote a letter to Mrinalini Mata protesting, you see, like, I don't think this word is appropriate for this prayer, like, I don't like it, like, impinge. And then 3 or 4 months passed, she never replied to him. And then one day he was walking near the ashram in the street, and she came walking in the distance. And once she saw him, she looked at him and purposefully started walking in his direction. And then the first thing that she said, you see, like, so you don't want God to impinge yourself upon us? So basically, there's a point where the intellect is so ingrained upon us that unless there is some forceful, some strong intervention, it's very hard to dislodge the ego from its position. So she encouraged him, like, so we should pray really like, God, like, impinge your love upon us. It has to be strong for the ego sometimes to be dislodged.
Maybe that's why Yogananda's voice is so powerful to us. We're so thunderous. The impingement is certainly there, isn't it? Why are you meditating? Why didn't you meditate last night?
Yeah, it says wake, saint, wake, right? And it's so awesome to think that every saint was a sinner that didn't give up in a sense, and there's struggle and effort, sufficient effort to be made, and Yogananda talks about knowing your enemy and knowing the effort that you have to put towards overcoming your enemy, and that in itself is very powerful, because give the devil or Satan credit where credit is due. It's a very, very powerful foe. So you have to simply muster all the courage and all the strength you can, and that's what Yogananda talks about. Be a warrior, right? And he talks about this, being a spiritual warrior. So powerful stories on my side. I think there's been 1 or 2 times when going through the world of Maya, coming out of it and realizing nothing sufficient to satisfy whatever thirst I had, and then hearing Yogananda's words through the autobiography of Yogi. I've never read a book so fast, and that was, whenever I started reading that book, I realized that I was so thirsty for that information, and just had to run around circles before eventually I got shunted onto the path by a friend of mine. So shall we look at the last part of of this minute? And we talked about Mas Vidal's comments here, and as he's talking, there's scenes from India, and it's showing people on the boats in the river, and something's being burnt on the side. And I kind of thought to myself, I need to ask Priyank, what is going on here in these scenes? Because there's dozens and dozens of people congregating around the river's edge. I've never been to India, and maybe Pablo, I'll come to you first. Have you been to India? Have you seen these scenes that are depicted in this minute, where there's maybe thousands of people surrounding rivers and so many different scenes happening with people burning bodies and different things? That's very, very different to what happens probably in Brazil and the West.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something typically Indian. I think like Priyank would be able to tell more exactly about what it is. But I think there's like the cremation going on to some extent, and I think there's also people who are like doing some devotional practices in the Ganges.
You've never been there.
Yes. So I've been to India once, but I just passed quickly through the Ghats. I haven't really spent too much time there.
Frank, what's going on in these scenes? And is that the case? Do you think? With cremations?
Certainly is cremation, and we've seen these scenes before. So that's probably just down the road from Lahiri Mahashai's house, and so it's in Kashi. So I think it's the same kind of city as we had before in the previous scene. So yeah, certainly is a cremation going on, and made all the more powerful because it seems to be in the evening sun, and yeah, everything's glistening, and there's some aura about that scene, isn't there? It's very moving.
Mm-hmm. What I thought was particularly interesting was the ringing of the bell, and it was just charming in the background, and it reminded me of Yogananda. I think it was Yogananda saying that the bell was really created in India many years ago, when you would have people in states of meditation hearing these different sounds, as we know, going through the lessons of SRF, one of them being bells ringing in the right ear. And so this is the human effort to try to reenact and bring in from the heavens, like the sounds of heaven, into earth. So the bell, supposedly, I've tried to look this up plenty of times on Google and online. I can't quite find the information, but yeah, I mean, if Yogananda says it, it's good enough for me. But this was ringing in the background of these scenes, and just made me almost, get transfixed in, for a very short space of time. So there you have it. That's the whole minute. Any final comments? I think we've come past an hour for recording, gents. So Pablo, any final comments from you on the course of the minute?
Right. So like just what came to my mind as I saw this cremations going on, I just remembered, I think it was Yogananda, but I don't want to affirm because I'm not entirely sure. But like many yogis say that like it's beneficial to meditate in cemeteries because it reminds you of how life is passing, So if you're there meditating and thinking about thousands of things, and then you remember, sometimes that's how life goes, So I just remember that that somehow that could be related to the gods. I don't know, like just remember how life is passing, and you have to make a spiritual effort now.
Awesome. Priyank, Mike, anything from you?
No, just to thank Pablo for his inclusion. Thank you so much for joining us. It was lovely to have you and to see you. I guess see you and speak to you after a couple of years, Pablo.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to being here, and I very much enjoyed the vibration of this talk.
Last time Pablo, I think last time I saw Pablo, he bought me a small gift for my had that wedding vows ceremony. Yeah, I remember we had that ceremony at when the monks came with my wife and I, and Pablo gave me a little travel altar, and
oh, wow.
And it's been a big feature of my life now. I see it's on the wall there.
Oh yeah.
And I've got two now, and I've made one for my wallet as well. So I've got 3 travel altars.
Oh, I'm glad you still have it.
Really nice gift. Really good.
Pablo, I'll be moving to Brazil in 2 weeks, so I'll be moving over. But when are you moving to France?
Probably by September. I don't have the exact date. But you're going to Belo Horizonte?
Belo Horizonte, yeah. I'll be there. So maybe in the future, if we're kind of connecting, I'll be down south. So I'll be keen to see some of the SRF sites that.
Please do get in touch. Looking forward to see you sometime here. Maybe like if I'm not here, like during the most of the year, for sure for vacations I'll be.
Epic. Look forward to it. Mike, just to offer you a moment, if anything, any kind of comments or reflections on the minute.
I keep asking myself when I hear about Kashi, why does the city have so many names, and is it ever going to be called Kashi officially? I would find that make it easier, because like in the autobiography they call it Benares, then right now it's called Varanasi, right? And Guruji always called it Kashi because it was the ancient city of Kashi. So I feel like it would be a kind of making it easier for everybody if it was just called Kashi.
Yeah, it sounds pretty cool, Kashi. I'm looking up Kashi meaning. It's I'm getting lots of IT terms, so I think I spelled it wrong. But one for the future analysis, I think. But thank you very much, gents. Thanks for your time, for joining us, Pablo.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.